What's going on, guys? It's Mohammed, the host of Aware Alpha, and welcome to episode 105. I just want to say I am super, super grateful. I love that we have a platform here where I'm able to share my voice, lessons, experiences, and at the same time, bring guests onto the show that I feel could bring some value to the audience. Today, we have another special guest that I felt called to reach out on social media a couple of months ago, and I'm super excited to have her here on the Aware Alpha podcast. She is a sexual intimacy coach. She's also somebody that has a program that helps men get over, I guess, become sexual gods is the best way I could say it. So with that being said, Fabian, welcome to the Aware Alpha podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here.
You're welcome. One of the first questions that comes off the top of my head here is that what made you get into this space of teaching men?
So where to begin? This, in a way, has always working with men, particularly around, in general, working with men has always come very naturally to me. I have 4 brothers. I have always had a lot of male friends. So working with men and speaking with men about particularly sensitive or potentially even taboo subjects has always come naturally and been sort of a part of my life. I've always been a question asker as well. And then through my own history of sexual healing and all of that, I started to do sexuality work and first worked with women for years, and then started to see that there was I was being drawn to working with men, and it felt like a natural sort of flow to, especially because when I was working with women, I was seeing there's less out there for men, particularly with women offering support for men. And I think this sort of like supporting each other through all of this and rising and growing and learning and developing into ourselves more and more side by side is so important. And yeah, I've always just had such an appreciation for and just a closeness for men, right? So many of my friends have been men, and I've always found such a beauty in our ability to support each other and to open to each other and to really be able to hear each other's deepest insecurities, deepest fears, deepest desires. And yeah, and the more that I started to work with men, the more it felt like really the area where I really wanted to be of service, and the area where that felt so natural for me and felt like such a calling and such an inspiration.
That's interesting. Thank you for sharing that. What's one thing that you have learned from your experience of working with women and men in this, in your lifetime? What are maybe even 2, 3 things that you have just learned from working with men and women, whether it's sexual or not?
Things that I've learned just in general, things that I've
Yeah,
learned
just in
through
general,
my
things
work
that
as a coach.
yeah, things that you have taken away, whether it's things that you're like, I've just noticed a lot of men and women feel alone and need intimacy, or whether it's something that you have taken away for yourself where you have realized that I love working with people, or whatever it is, just in general, what are some things that you have just taken away and learned?
Let's see, something, I mean, a huge thing that I've learned from this work is, like I said, that we need to do this together, right? That I see so much of this work around stepping into our sexuality. I've, in the past like 10 years or so, I've seen more of that for women evolving and emerging in this sort of like rise of women taking back their sexuality. And I have seen that for men, particularly in the last few years. I've been seeing more of that. But the way that I see it, it's like we have to do it side by side, right? We're not separate, and so the healing and the growth and the exploration, when it happens side by side, there's everything moves at such a quicker pace, like on a sort of broad spread humanity level. And so something that I've learned is like the power of doing this side by side, and how often the insecurities or the fears or the pain points are so enmeshed with each other's, and how much the expression of and working with these insecurities side by side allows us to see that we can and need to work through this together, that we can and need to support each other as we sort of write a new paradigm, as we move into a new way of relating to ourselves and to our sexuality and to sexual energy and intimacy in general.
You know, of course, everybody is different, every individual is different, but as a general, who do you think is more insecure, women or men? And when it comes to sexuality?
Yeah. To be honest, I don't see one being generally more insecure than the other. I see patterns. I see patterns within that might be different. Again, they're quite generalizations, but they just show up in different ways, right? With men, I see so much around this like performance anxiety, right? Of like, I've got to perform, I've got to do this, I've got to make sure that I make my partner feel a certain way, or I've got to appear like I am a certain way, right? There's so much performance anxiety. And then I see as a theme for women also another version of performance anxiety, but I see just a whole different version of like, am I seen, am I celebrated, am I important? And they just show up in different ways, right? So I don't actually see that there's between women and men, I don't see that there's one of those two genders that is more insecure, just rather that it shows up in different ways and it is worked through our systems in different ways.
I was just curious because I worked with men for a couple of years. I had a program helping men over 30 get over watching their porn addiction. And so having many different conversations, but it never worked with women. So I was just curious if, but like you're right though. I feel like it's everybody has their insecurities and their fears, and it shows up. Where do you think, I feel like, performance anxiety seems like a very common thing. Where do you feel like that comes from? Is it from is it trauma, childhood trauma, or is it from watching too much porn?
It's a great question. I think it comes from so many different areas. I think that insecurity, sexual performance insecurity or performance anxiety, it comes from porn is a huge one. It's a huge one. You see like actors, athletes in a way who are like trained to specifically do a certain thing for a certain amount of time, looking a certain way. And oftentimes it's not even real, right? Oftentimes you don't see the breaks in between. You don't see the like chemical pills that they're taking to whatever, it's totally unrealistic. And so I think that has a huge effect on how men think that they should be performing, think how men perceive what is normal, right? And so porn is a huge one, huge one. And then I think also things from childhood, feeling like we have to be a certain way, and this can be from our families, this can be from society, feeling like if I'm not holding myself in perfect strength, chin up, straight spine, if I'm not completely confident, if I'm not sure of myself, if I'm not taking charge, if I'm not ABCD, then I'm not good enough, right? Then I am weak, then I am less than. And so you get all of these different areas saying you've got to be a certain way or else you're not worthy, or unless you're exactly this certain way of being in this specific mood, then you're not sexy, you're not attractive, you're not the man of their dreams, you're not whatever.
I feel like
it comes from a lot of places.
Oh, for sure. I feel like porn and culture and environment definitely has a big influence on it. Like if you're not over 6 foot, don't have an 8-inch penis, and you don't perform, at least 45 minutes without any stops, then you are just not good. And that influences a lot of men, I feel, right? So you make a great point there. Random question. There's going to be lots of these questions, and it's interesting. Prior to the podcast, Fabienne was asking what we're going to talk about. And most of the guests that I have had some people mention I'm like an organic facilitator, because it's like, I don't really know what's going to come up. But so what is up with men most of the times? Is this something from like our ancestral times, or is it a trauma response where when men ejaculate, they withdraw right after that. Is that a trauma response, or is that something ancestral where like you would, impregnate the woman and then go back out, go do your thing, hunt, whatever it is? I'm really curious to
Right.
hear your answer on that.
Yeah. Well, on a biochemical level, you, when you're approaching ejaculation, you have a dopamine peak and your prolactin levels are low. And then when you ejaculate, your dopamine drops down and your prolactin spikes. And prolactin makes you sort of in this like withdrawn state of being, oftentimes like quite, yeah, with withdrawn, a little bit of like the urge to isolate or just like have quietness, nothingness. And also can come with like fatigue, tiredness. So on a biochemical level, when you dopamine and prolactin, they cannot both be high at the same time. When one is high, the other is low. So when you have this peak burst of dopamine, your prolactin is going to do the opposite of whatever it's doing and spike. And I don't fully understand on a biochemical level why those things can't exist at the same time. In terms of the actual chemistry behind it, I'm not sure. But my guess around that is something along the lines of we have this surge of feel good hormone that literally happens when we are reproducing. And so that is why we have that massive surge in that moment. So it's pretty natural and normal and like biological that there's this drop afterwards. And also it's a drop in energy, right? It's like you're releasing some kind of energy, and then the automatic response is going to be like rest, come back to myself, come back to my energy. Like I just expended, released energy that is literally life-giving. It's like some of the most potent energy that I have, and I just released some of it. And so it makes sense for us to then, take a moment. And orgasm doesn't do that, but ejaculation does, right? And so that's why if you decide to learn how to separate orgasm and ejaculation, you can have orgasms where you don't feel any kind of drop in energy, you don't feel any kind of retraction, you can stay super energetic and present, which some guys also can do that after ejaculation, particularly when they're younger, is what I've seen. But yeah, I don't think it's based on trauma or anything like that, as much as it's just sort of that's what's happening in the body, and you can separate those two if you want to, and if you choose to go through the journey of separating orgasm and ejaculation.
What does first of all, that was an amazing answer. And yes, that was a great answer. I feel like there's so many different ways I want to go here. I have questions about so what we just talked about here. So if somebody is curious about wanting to separate their orgasm and ejaculation, right? What does that process look like? I'm sure it's a lot of self-discipline and self-control and all that, but yeah, like what does that look like? How do you start that work of being able to orgasm without ejaculating? Which is, I think, I feel like there's a lot of people online talking about these days of becoming a multi-orgasmic man. Yeah, what does that look like, or what's the process look like?
Yeah. So let's see how to wrap this into something digestible. With the process of separating these two, it's going to look a little bit different for everybody. But one of the first steps to doing this process is beginning an edging practice, right? Where you bring yourself close, higher level of arousal, and then you sort of back yourself away, bringing yourself closer to, if 0 is not turned on and 100 is having an orgasm, bringing yourself up to like 70, 80, 90%, getting really familiar with those higher states of arousal. And so doing an edging practice where you're edging closer and further and closer and further, that's a great first step. And really developing your awareness of exactly where you're at, developing your awareness of your own sexual energy, developing your your ability to really feel and know your sexual turn on levels, and then to know what to do with that energy, right? So using breath techniques, using relaxation techniques, using that edging practice, using your awareness. So foundationally, having an edging practice where you can begin to understand what's happening, begin to get more in touch with your levels, and then develop the tools necessary for moving energy through your body. Because when energy builds up and doesn't have anywhere to go, it has only one direction, which is out. And so developing your tools and cultivating your practice for moving that energy through your body is going to be a huge step in that.
That's a great answer. So I've heard different things where, some people will say, some instructors would say to do edging, and then it's okay if you do that for, let's say, usually you ejaculate in 5 minutes and you do an edging practice for 25 minutes. And then at the end of that, it's okay to ejaculate. But then I've also heard certain people say that, no, if, usually you ejaculate in 5 minutes, you do an edging practice for 25 minutes and then don't ejaculate. And then, so what are your thoughts? Would you suggest if somebody starts to do an edging practice, is it okay if they ejaculate at the end of this, or it's not okay?
It's a great question. My approach to this is always, you know yourself and you do your thing, and I won't tell you what is right or what is sort of like the right or wrong way to do this. With a lot of the men who I've worked with, when they choose to either greatly minimize or take out their ejaculation for a certain amount of time, their capacity to have multiple orgasms or non-ejaculatory orgasms, the amount of time that it takes them to get to that place tends to be shorter. So if you're wanting to have that, I would recommend either minimizing. So maybe you're ejaculating once a week or once every 2 weeks, once every 10 days. It can sometimes be a good amount of time to sort of be able to build that practice in the meantime, where you're also self-pleasuring or making love and not ejaculating. So you're really getting into the practice of that. And then every once in a while ejaculating. Some guys like to just like, I'm going for it and I'm not going to ejaculate and I'm going to practice this. And if I ejaculate, this is an important thing, is I think if you are choosing to not ejaculate and to really cultivate this practice, being patient with yourself if and when ejaculation does happen, because the whole like, no, I made it this long and now I have to start over from the beginning, and this whole sort of like self-shaming or impatience with self, I don't think helps the process at all. I think that's like a huge energy leak. I think it's actually detrimental to the progress. And so having patience with yourself and saying like, all right, I'm trying to figure this out. This is completely different from how I've probably been self-pleasuring through my entire life, and being patient with yourself and simultaneously creating boundaries, right? Creating a framework for your progress, right? If you're ejaculating every day and you're trying to have non-ejaculatory orgasms, it's going to be hard to figure out how to do it. It's going to be hard to practice that. So I would say minimize or try for 2 months, right? Try for 2 months and then be super patient and forgiving with yourself if and when you do have ejaculations, when you're really getting in touch with that like 90, 80, 90, 100% range.
Okay, that's a great answer. And second thing on the same topic, is it okay to watch porn while you're doing an edging practice, or would you suggest don't be watching pornography, don't be using fantasy, instead just actually be in your body and make sure you're hard naturally and not using images to get yourself hard?
Yeah, this is also a great question. And this is something that I have a very similar stance to the last piece, which is I see a lot of guys who have used porn for years and years and years, and it has really negatively impacted their lives, and particularly their ability to get turned on in their naturalness, right? And when you are trying to move away from watching porn and you're like shaming yourself every time you do it, and you're like, I can't do that, and you become rigid, it actually creates this disharmony within you as well. And so I have spoken some in the past of like, how are ways that we can watch porn while making it less destructive? And I think moving away from porn is always a great idea. I honestly think porn is super destructive. And if it's every once in a while, it's not the end of the world, but it's important to have it be choice, right? When we can only get turned on from pornography, that's when it becomes, it's taken all of our power, right? It's taken all of our choice. It's taken our sexuality into its own hands, right? And so what I see as the most important thing is to have choice. And so if that means every once in a while watching porn until you start to, it's like you're retraining your nervous system to be able to get turned on by your naturalness, right? By yourself, by things that are real. So intentionally moving away from pornography is really important. And something that I recommend for guys who have been watching porn and can only get turned on from pornography is I recommend watching it, but not stimulating yourself at all. And then closing the computer or whatever, and then coming back to sensation, right? And that as sort of like a bridge into getting turned on by sensation again, right? It's like training the nervous system, because if I've only been able to get turned on by this visual stimulation, how can I like make steps towards being turned on by sensation, right? Maybe I move from porn to fantasy and then maybe I move sort of inwards towards myself and consistently bring my attention back to the sensations. So I can be maybe turned on by a fantasy, but then I'm coming back to the sensation, letting my mind go to a thought, and then I'm coming back to the sensation. So consistently retraining your nervous system, consistently retraining your sexual turn on and desire to come back to yourself is huge. And I think that is just a big part of the journey. And by saying like, I'll never fantasize again, and I don't think that that's helpful. It can be to say like, if it's integrated and if it works for you, and if it doesn't end in you feeling totally frustrated and like, how will I ever feel turned on again? Like there's a way to do it where you're retraining yourself. That being said, it's important not to get caught in the, I'm just doing the retraining process and then never try to move away from it, right? So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think having some level of patience with yourself and an understanding that you're developing a completely different way of doing things is really key here.
No, that makes total sense. I think that would be a great sense of self-control as well. If somebody is able to actually, especially somebody that's watched porn for a long time, if they're able to watch it for a couple of minutes and then get away from it and then use sensation, that's still a great first step to be moving away from pornography. From my experience, I know a lot of guys that once they open the screen, they cannot leave the screen until they ejaculate, because it's just like it grabs a hold of you, right?
Dopamine. Yeah.
Exactly,
No,
right?
and a lot of the guys in who have taken my course, my 12-week course, they completely get off porn, and then sometimes 2 or 3 months in, will try watching porn. A few guys have reported they're like, I tried watching it to see how it would be because I haven't in 2 months. And every single one of them has said, I could feel the like surge of dopamine and the urge, but I recognized that there was a different, better way. I've developed something that feels better. And I think that's key, is that our bodies don't want to do a new thing if that other thing still seems like a better idea. And so building something that actually feels better is so important to moving away from a habit that we haven't found to be healthy, but that's like sending us these dopamine rushes.
Awareness is a beautiful thing. So I'm not sure where I read this. I think it's a Chinese medicine man. This online guru one time was sharing about where ejaculation in your 20s, you should only be ejaculating, I think, twice or once a week. In your 30s, every 16 days. In your 40s, every like month. In your 50s, even less. Have you ever heard anything like this, or what are your thoughts on, because I'm like myself, I'm very well aware, like in your ejaculation, your sperm, there's so much zinc, fat, protein, B12. Like it's literally like it mixed with an egg, it makes a person like freaking life force, right? But yeah, what are your thoughts on that, or what you have learned from your studies? You know, how often is okay to ejaculate? And let's go from the spectrum of 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s.
Yeah, you know what? There are a lot of different answers to this from a lot of different schools of thought, from different lineages. People have different ideas around this. But I think what you just shared is a great framework to use. You know, if you're in your 30s, try every other week. Try yeah, you know, I think the important thing is to notice your own levels and to get to know yourself, to get to know, when am I feeling depleted, and try it once a week and see how you feel. See how you feel. Try it once a week, and also start to learn circulation techniques, breath techniques, and see how you feel. And some guys, based on their diet, based on their exercise, based on their lifestyle, based on their environment, it's going to be different based on if they're practicing qigong every day, right? There are like all of these different aspects that influence it. And so I would say, like, get to know yourself and see what happens if you only ejaculate once a week, and see what happens if you only ejaculate every other week. Notice what's happening in your body, noticing if there's a buildup of that sexual energy, and can you learn to manage it? Can you learn to be with that energy and move it through your system in a good way?
And I wanted to pretty much the reason why I was asking that is to get into, is it healthy to not ejaculate at all? And I asked that because I feel like our body knows itself best. And, you know, I've gone extended periods of not ejaculating over, 6 months. However, during those 6 month period, I had wet dreams and my body discharged. So it's like, I believe, like, I feel like I'm still, learning and reevaluating what I understand about this stuff. That it's okay to not ejaculate because your body will discharge when it gets time through the wet dreams. But then you get to a point, if you practice Kegels and all these things, that even in your wet dream, you can stop the ejaculation from happening. So I'm curious, like, is it healthy to not ejaculate at all? Or would you say no, like you need to be, it's part of our natural thing and we must do it at least once a month or something like that? I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is another one where everybody seems to have different things to say about this. And I agree with you. I think our bodies do know what we need. And I think the issue comes when we are like super strict with our bodies and with ourselves. I have a friend who hasn't ejaculated in 17 years, and he ejaculated once to create a child. And in those 17 years, and he is like super dedicated, super devoted, very healthy, looks a lot younger than he is. He has a very dialed in practice of moving the energy through the body. I think the main issue comes in when you're not ejaculating, but you also aren't moving the energy through your system, right? When you're not creating that the movement for the buildup of energy. That can, right? If you have a buildup of energy, you can have blue balls, like you can literally feel pain. It can create problems for your prostate, right? You need to be moving that energy. That's, for me, in my understanding, that's the important part. So circulation techniques, massage as well is helpful. Prostate massage, testicle massage. And so I think more than anything, again, that like getting to know your body and being in good relation to what's happening and not being like dogmatic about things. And I also, they're speaking of dogmatic ideas, there can sometimes in the world of like no fap or like all of this semen retention, sort of what I see in like a bunch of like Reddit forums and all that, there can be and also with some coaches, right, where there can be this like, if you ejaculate, you're losing your power, you're giving up your most potent energy, and it like becomes very shamey kind of. And I don't think that ejaculating every once in a while is bad for you, or like is gonna like make you less of a man, or like, I think choosing, noticing, oh, I just dropped my energy a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to take me a couple days to maybe feel quite as energetic as I did. And also to allow, if you're having wet dreams, like that's okay. And if you feel exhausted after the wet dream, like noticing it and yeah, first and foremost, being in good relation to your body and not being dogmatic in either direction, and knowing how to circulate energy, knowing how to move that energy so it's not getting stuck in the testicles, stuck in the pelvic floor, and so that it's actually charging you up instead of just creating this buildup, either physical buildup that could actually lead to pain or an emotional buildup, right? If you're not circulating the energy, if you're not grounding it back down, you might start to feel aggression, you might start to feel a buildup of anger or restlessness, or like your sexual energy is like totally controlling you even more because you because it's there's so much of it and it's so intense. So learning what to do with it, I think, is the most important thing. And I don't think there's I think an ejaculation every once in a while is like great.
Okay, no, that's a great answer. I was gonna ask what you meant by circulation, but what you're talking about is circulating and transmuting your sexual energy from, let's say, your genitals up to your spine, into your heart, into your mind. That's what you're kind of talking about?
Yeah, so circulation, microcosmic orbit is a great example of that. Sublimation, moving energy upwards; transmutation, transmuting energy from one form into another form. Um, and yeah, circulating using the breath, using your awareness, using all sorts of different techniques.
Okay. Since we kind of talked about it, but you mentioned the word semen retention, and I feel like it's one of those things that's thrown all over the internet these days, in the Reddit groups and the red pill groups, and the it's everywhere. What are your thoughts? I feel like we kind of already talked about it in a way, but I'm gonna ask anyways. What are your thoughts on semen retention?
Yeah. I think it's a beautiful, practice for energy cultivation, for having, building, cultivating your energy, for being in control of your own energy, right? It's like choosing when to release, like you said, all of your like tons of zincs, tons of B12, tons of protein, like choosing when to release that energy. And for me, it's all about choice. Again, it's like with the pornography or the fantasy, it's all about choice. It's like, am I choosing when to give this energy? Or is my um, attachment to, I just want to release this. I just want to release this. Is that actually driving me towards, I've got to do this thing. I've got to, um, when we start to need an experience, when we start to attach to, I need to ejaculate, then it kind of drives us. And then we're in less control over ourselves and less awareness. And with semen retention, it gives us a little bit more spaciousness to have a say in what we do, how we manage our energy, when we release, right? Because it's like that energy drives us and then drains us. And so when we have that awareness and we have that control, it can allow us to actually build the energy and cultivate more of the energy and use that energy towards something that we want, right? When we're full of that energy and we don't release it, we can use that towards our business, our family, our creative projects, right? It's energy is energy, right? And it's when it's sexual energy, and you use it towards something else, that doesn't mean you're putting sexual energy towards something else. It just means you're utilizing that life force, you're utilizing that energy within you, and then you're pointing it in a direction of your choice. And so many men who practice semen retention just talk about feeling so much more empowered in their lives to choose where they're putting that buildup of energy.
No,
And then to top it off, you can oftentimes then experience non-ejaculatory orgasms when you practice semen retention alongside some other practices.
No, that's good. I'm gonna ask you, it's interesting, like if my listeners, 50% of listeners are women and 50% are men. So I'm like, I should definitely ask some, I don't want to make this podcast just for the men here. when it comes to women, is it the same thing where if they, let's say, not ejaculate and use the sexual energy for something, like how different is that? Where for men, if you don't ejaculate and like you're keeping that life force in, but where from my conversations with different initiatrix and sexual coaches last couple of years, but for a woman to release her sexual energy, it's more liberating and it's better. Yeah, I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, so from my own perspective, it depends so much on the woman.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're going into sort of like Taoist teachings or tantric teachings, there's a lot around where do we lose our ojas, right? Where do we lose our jing or our life force energy? And so according to those teachings, with women, it's more so through menstruation and childbirth, and then for men, it's more through ejaculation. And there's like the literal physical release, right? When we menstruate, we're like gathering all of our best vitamins and minerals and everything, and then we're releasing it.
Yeah.
And so from that perspective, it's less so about and I'm actually not sure what they, in terms of female ejaculation, and that release of energy from Amrita or female ejaculation, it's not a buildup of baby making minerals. So it's different from my understanding. So that's from that angle. And then in terms of when I say it's different for every woman, there are some women who feel tired after orgasm. What I've noticed, and from working with women, from my own experience, from studying this, is that it depends also on the kind of orgasm, right? So a lot of women say that after a clitoral orgasm, there's more sensitivity, there's a little bit more of a drop of energy, and that's not true for every woman at all, but that's something that I've heard a lot of women say. Whereas a cervical orgasm might create more of like a tenderness afterwards, but like a pulsing life force moving through them. So it depends a lot on the woman, and it depends a lot on the type of orgasm for the woman as well.
Okay. No, that's a great answer. Something that just came to my mind here. How many countries have you traveled to in your lifetime?
I don't know. I'm not sure.
Is it
Maybe, I don't know.
like over a 10, 20, 30? Just random
Probably
question.
30, maybe.
Wow, that's amazing.
I don't
And
know.
what have you learned through your travels? Like about just, you've probably lived and traveled in first world countries, third world countries. Like, I'm just curious to hear your experiences. Like, what have you learned from traveling so much?
I've learned just about everything that I know, I would say. Yeah, I've learned so much about humanity, learned so much about myself, learned so much about, especially as a sexuality and intimacy coach, I'm consistently looking at the world through the lens of our bodies and our ways of relating to each other, and our intimate relationships. And so I've just, through my travels, gotten so much perspective of the differences in ways of interacting with each other and ourselves, and different ways of expressing our sexuality, and different ways of moving sexual energy through our bodies and showing it or not showing it, interacting, allowing it through dance or not allowing it through dance. I've studied dance in a lot of the places that I've traveled. That's been a big mission behind a lot of my travels. And so the expression of our sensuality and our connection to life around us, and how that is portrayed in dance and how that is accessed in dance, has given me such a beautiful insight into the different places that I've traveled to.
Interesting. It just came to my mind because I love to travel, but I feel like I've lived in 4 or 5 different countries in the Middle East, and now I'm in Canada. But I was just curious. Another question that came to my mind is, which cultures are have you experienced that are more sexually liberated? Where I feel like, in North America, I feel like we're not as much sexually liberated, or it's not something that is common to talk about and it's okay. Where I don't know if there's other cultures where they're more sexually liberated and they do talk about sexuality and the expression of sexuality through dance, movement, and all those things. From your
Mhm.
experience, which cultures that you feel like are more, just sexually liberated cultures?
Yeah, it's a really good question, particularly because I find that there's different versions of that. Again, this is all through my own perspective and perception.
Mhm.
Um, but I see in like Brazilian culture and South and Central American culture, I see a lot more of like a flirtation and welcoming of some sexual energy into dance, and
Mm,
that being a little bit more normalized and welcomed and played with.
mm,
I find in African dance, for example, and I've only been in terms of, well, I've been in two African countries, but one being Egypt and then one being Guinea. And in West African dance, I find that there's like a sensuality and like a connection to the sexual centers,
mm,
but not necessarily with like a cultural openness around sexuality. It's almost like a an embodiment of sensual nature and also just like reproductive nature. There's like a lot of, even just like a lot of moves that are like literally an expression of reproduction, right? Where you're like moves of like shooting milk from your nipples or like different moves that I've learned from teachers where they're that like this is a mating dance. This is like a dance to like flirt and like find your woman or your dude or whatever. But that I haven't seen that necessarily comes with a like a cultural open, it's like just a different cultural approach, not
mm,
necessarily like cultural openness to it.
mm.
Again, all from my perception as an outsider. In like a lot of the traditional dances of within the United States, traditional meaning traditional to like the new post-colonial United States.
Yeah.
So like traditional, but only within the past couple hundred years, sort of like European dances. I see a lot more of like the closure,
Yeah.
but then you've got sort of like then some of the African influence coming up from the South and within the United States, I see everything, right? I see like these, for example, in like West Coast based culture in California, I see some of the most sexually liberated dancing and culture that I've seen anywhere. So
Mm.
it's like there are sub pockets of everything everywhere.
No, that's amazing. And if you could live in any country that you have lived, what's your like favorite place to live in the world?
Well, I live in Mexico right now and I love it here.
Mm,
And I love California. I really, really do. I never thought I'd live in the States, but then I found a great little mountain town in Northern California that I love.
mhm,
Um, and I've loved living in Europe. I love living in Central America. Everything comes with its own beauty
mm.
and its own way of life. And yeah.
I love that. I just had those questions that just came to me. I didn't want this podcast, the whole thing to be about sex and ejaculation and all that, which is totally okay. Like, it can be about anything that comes up. I feel like as men and women, we all have a lot of rage and aggression.
Mhm.
And of course, I'm sure we can all see it in the world. A lot of times this rage and aggression is not expressed in a healthy way. Do you feel like it's like a two-part question. Do you feel like there's a healthy way of expressing rage and aggression?
Totally, 100%. And I think it's actually vital to
Mm,
our health and our relational and sexual health is finding healthy outlets for rage and
okay.
aggression and integrating our relationship to rage and aggression so that we can express it in a way that's healthy and in a way that's, like I
Mhm,
said, integrated in a way um, where we know what we're doing with it in a way, or creating a container of safety so that we have a way to express it in a
mm.
safe way.
And what does that healthy expression of rage and aggression look like? I'm curious, like, is it
It can
boxing,
look,
doing some martial
yeah,
arts, or
it
is
can
it?
look in so many different ways. It can look so many different ways. Boxing, martial arts, those can be healthy ways. Those also can be unhealthy ways. For me, so much of it is around getting to know our anger, getting to know our aggression, and being able to stay present while we're in it. So accessing our aggression, accessing our rage, and then instead of getting totally lost in it, allowing ourselves to be in it while maintaining our presence.
Mm,
While maintaining a good relationship with ourselves, right? And that doesn't mean not like totally losing our shit sometimes, right? But creating safety around, like, I know for myself, I will sometimes go into my car, or I'll like go into the cabin out back where I like have total privacy, and I'll like hit pillows, and I'll like throw a whole, I'll like create the container so that I can fully unleash into the rage while staying present, hopefully. But where there's it's intentional, and and I'm working with it, and I'm getting to know it so that it's not just like randomly popping out at any given moment.
that's a great answer. And premature ejaculation, it seems like it's a very common thing these days. And I think it's all personal opinion. Like, so you could be like, oh, if you come in 1 minute, you have premature ejaculation, but if that 1 minute is okay for your partner, then you're totally okay. But it is. So my question is, what is the cause of premature ejaculation in your personal opinion?
What is the cause of premature ejaculation?
Mm,
One cause can be not having the capacity to hold that energy, right? Not knowing how to hold higher states of arousal.
mm,
Oftentimes, especially if oftentimes our relationship to masturbation or self-pleasure from a very early age was, how quickly can I do this? And how secretly and quietly can I do this, right? And
mm,
it's for so many people was a very shameful experience of
mm,
like, I've got to do this thing. It feels like good, but also weird afterwards. And I'm going to like do it as quickly as I can. And then our bodies start to train that way, where we've literally been training for however many years we've been alive, or however many years we've been accessing our sexual energy, however many years we've been self-pleasuring. We've been training ourselves to finish as quickly as possible.
yeah.
And so when you train for many, many years in one way, and then you're watching porn and you're like, oh, but I should be performing this other way, there's this gap of like, here's how I've been training, here's what I think I should be performing as, and they're not lining up.
Mm,
And so I think a huge factor to premature ejaculation and cause behind it is training in one way, training in a way that is about ejaculating as quickly as possible, and then expecting anything different than that.
mm. That's a great answer. Is it how often can childhood trauma, especially if somebody, let's say they were, they were sexually assaulted, let's say focusing on men, like let's say they were raped as a young child and living now their 20s, 30s, or 40s, could that experience that happened to them at one point, can that cause, because of the nervous system not being regulated, I don't know if I'm even making sense here, but like, could that cause premature ejaculation?
Totally, totally. Yeah, trauma is stored in the body, as we know, and it can show up in a whole myriad of ways. It can show up in so many different ways. And sometimes it's premature ejaculation, sometimes it's inability to have an orgasm, sometimes it's an uncomfortable feeling when we do orgasm. It can show up in so many different ways for different people. And it's
Mm,
honestly so many, I hear so often, like, is this normal? Yes, like just about everything. Our bodies hold our traumas, our bodies hold our memories, and then we have the choice, and we have the well, we have the ability to shift things.
mm,
We have the ability to create new pathways, right? Luckily, we have the capacity to meet ourselves and to work with all of this, and to rebuild our relationships to sexuality and recreate how we experience sex and
Mm,
pleasure and all of that.
no, that's good. So, whoever that's listening to the podcast, Fabienne has a free course actually. Also, it's for Kegel practices.
Mhm.
Right? So I went to actually download it the other day. I like to do like a little research on the guests that I bring on the show, and I was just like in my head, I'm like, this because especially like if a man is teaching women or a woman teaching men, I'm like, let's see what she's like. Is it actually good stuff, or is it good content, good actual practical stuff, or is this just another person out there that is just learned and wants to monetize this in this space and use her own sexual good looks and everything and to just make money, right? Which I must say, I'm definitely impressed because there's a lot of guys and girls online teaching, let's say, like, how to get over premature ejaculation and in Kegel practices. And all they teach is practice your Kegel, like, flex, squeeze, but I've, if you do too much of it, you can almost damage yourself because
Absolutely.
flexing Kegels is important, but then also unflexing, like relaxing those muscles, is just as important as well. Just share a little bit on that as we finish off this podcast. The
Mhm.
importance of practicing Kegels to, I guess, not only get over your premature ejaculation, but just to be just more relaxed. I feel like
Mhm.
when you are in a sex
Yeah.
encounter.
Yeah, I mean, practicing pelvic floor exercises is they're such helpful tools for our sexual performance, our sexual health, um, being able to last as long as you want, staying as hard as you want. And there, like you just said, if you practice, there's so much around, like, practice your Kegels, do your squeezes, strengthen these muscles. And it's equally as important to have a relaxed pelvic floor. Otherwise, there's just tension, which is going to lead to the opposite. It's going to lead to premature ejaculation and erectile dysfunction. So strengthening and toning without creating hypertension is so key. And so that free mini course, it has 3 different practices in it, around strengthening, there's another practice for sort of identifying the different muscles. When you develop your awareness of the muscles, you also will have a lot more control over your sexual energy. So there's a lot in that around how can you feel the different muscles within your pelvic floor, the different groupings within the pelvic floor area, and develop more awareness and develop more control. And then how do we fully relax the pelvic floor, and how do we create that sort of strong, toned, yet relaxed pelvic floor for optimal performance, optimal health?
That was a great answer. And I feel like I have so many questions, but I feel like we're getting close. I could probably do like a 2 hour podcast with you. Um, but I just want to say thank you so much for everything we talked about. This conversation was very valuable. I feel that to all the listeners, whether women or men that are going to be listening to this podcast, they're going to be getting a lot of value from it. And yeah, I'm just grateful once again for you coming on there and actually sharing about 1 hour of your time with us when you could be in the suns of Mexico, probably somewhere on the beach. So I just want to say thank you so much.
I can see the beach right now, so I'm good.
Oh man, you live in the dream. I can see the snow just a little bit outside of my window. So
Uh-huh.
we're totally
Yeah.
different climates. Let everybody know where they can find you, where they can connect with you. I'll make sure that I will add all those details in the podcast, and that way, if they want to, message you, follow you, have questions, they can reach out to you, Fabian.
Yeah, so you can find my Instagram, Fabienne Anique, at Fabienne Anique. And that's FabienneAnnick. You can find me at fabienneanique.com. And my email is fabienneanique@gmail.com. So pretty straightforward if you can get the spelling right.
Awesome.
But Instagram, it has all the links to all my website and my courses and that free program, the free pelvic floor program, my 12-week program. I have a men's dating course coming out in just about a month. So there are links to all of that in my Instagram.
Awesome. Well, actually, why not plug that into so men's dating program? Say a little about that in case somebody listening is curious about that. Is it going to teach them pickup lines or what?
So it's essentially it's going to be live. This first round of it is going to be live. I'm not sure if I'll run it live again, but it's going to be 8 weeks, and it's essentially 4 different modules. And first, it's the essence of the course is finding the people that you are actually interested in, who are actually interested in you. The first module is really around getting clear. What is it that I want? What kind of relationship? What kinds of connections am I wanting? Then we move into what's getting in the way, right? Like what within me, what within my patterns, my attachment styles, my own fears, what's getting in the way of me meeting the people, of me keeping the relationships that I am interested in. And then in the third module, we're going into creating that natural magnetism, right, which steps in with that sexual self-mastery as well. Like, how do we create natural magnetism where we're not using pickup lines that are just coming from something we read on the internet, but are actually, how do we actually magnetize people who are right for us based on our inner selves being being clear to the people around us? How do we naturally magnetize? And then we move in the fourth module into what are like great, like the almost like the simple, like what are great questions to ask people? What are some great communication tools? What are some ways to create safety and interest on dates, and sort of more of the like quote unquote practical aspects of dating. So it's a whole journey. It's going to be 8 weeks, and it's a whole experience for identifying what it is that you're moving towards, and then taking really clear action steps towards getting that internally and externally.
That's amazing. I'm sure anyone taking that program will get massive value from it. And thank you for sharing that. And lastly, Fabienne, thank you so much for your time. I totally appreciate it. And I'll definitely let you know once we release this podcast. And as we finish off this podcast for the listeners, lastly, what I want to share is that I truly hope that you not only take this information for just entertainment purposes. I really hope that you actually, take this information and try these and implement these into your day-to-day actions. And lastly, my intentions are for you to truly realize how powerful sexual energy is. And if you learn to transmute it into, creating a creative project, starting a business, starting a workout routine, whatever it is that you desire from your life, if you are able to tap into your sexual energy and learn to release it in these manners, I'm sure you will get massive, massive value from it. And until next time, stay an aware alpha.